So this is going to be the iPhone 14 Pro Max versus the OnePlus 11. Should you save the couple $100 and consider getting an Android OnePlus 11? It is starting at a price of around $699, and it did come out around mid-February as well, versus the iPhone 14 Pro Max starts at around $1099 and came out last year in 2022 around mid-September. So which one should you get? Or if you have an iPhone right now, should you consider switching? No, but let's see how they compare. As far as the build and the design, you can obviously see two differently designed devices here. So overall, the OnePlus 11 tends to lean more towards the sleekness, slimness. It's slender. It's like a very tall candy bar feeling in the hand. It's using Corning Gorilla Glass 5 on the back and Invictus on the front, and then you got an aluminum glossy frame. It's a pretty thin frame as well. So overall in the hand, it is very soft, very comfortable. The glass back is matte on the black model and then glossy on the green model. And this matte finish is kind of an odd finish to me. It's like it's got a bit of a texture. It sounds, you can, I don't know if you can hear it to the mic, but it's got a bit of a sound. It's got a bit of a weird texture feeling to it. I'm not a huge fan of it, so I definitely prefer using a case. But besides that, I think it's overall a pretty comfortable feeling device. It fits really nicely in the hand versus the iPhone. It's just a bulky, thick, squarish, flat finish design. So it feels like kind of like a brick in your hand. It definitely feels premium. It feels like you got a big chunk of change right here in your hand. But that frame is stainless steel. The matte glass is I think ceramic shield, and then the front is also ceramic shield, and you can see that the finish is flat. So the back glass is flat, the front glass is flat, no curves, just the corners are just a bit rounded. The edges are not the sharpest but also not the softest, so in the hand it kind of does feel a little bit odd for my liking. So over time I definitely feel a bit of fatigue with this phone, only because it is a heavy device and a thick device. So if you prefer a softer, more lightweight experience in your devices, so if you got like maybe small hands and you can't handle a big thick device, then the OnePlus 11 is going to be the way to go, because it's probably one of the thinnest, softest, lightest devices I've ever held in my hand. And as far as the camera bumps, the iPhone does have an actual camera bump on top of the lenses already sticking out a bit. So it does seem to stick out the most out of both of these devices. So on a flat surface, on a table, if you're trying to write something, it does tend to rock a good bit. Whereas on the OnePlus 11, it does rock as well, but it's got a more uniformal, I guess, camera bump where all the lenses are within a piece of glass. But it does have that circular camera bump, and it tries to kind of seamlessly blend itself from the camera bump to the actual aluminum frame, but there is a bit of a little cutoff, so it's not as clean looking. I thought at first, for a while, I thought it was a seamless blend in, but it's not. It's got a bit of a cutoff there. But overall, I do recommend a case on the OnePlus to add a little bit of weight and a little bit of grip as well, and on the iPhone to be able to soften up those edges. So on the iPhone, it does get even heavier depending on the case you get. I personally use Dbrand's grip case on the iPhone. It does make it a bit heavier, a bit chunkier, but it does add some good grippiness. Whereas on the OnePlus 11, I should have got, or I wish they had a Dbrand grip case for it, because it would add a good amount of depth and feel to it and weight to it. But I got a OnePlus 11 sandstone case, and it's also pretty thin and pretty lightweight, so it doesn't really make the phone any thicker or really any heavier or anything like that. But really depends on what kind of case you get. I'm only using it because I got it free. If it wasn't free, I would probably get a speaking case. But besides that, that's pretty much it with build and design. Now, as far as buttons and ports, on the OnePlus you do have USB-C at the bottom, versus on the iPhone you do have Lightning still. Both of them do have dual firing speakers, and I would say both of them sound pretty good overall. If you're using them standalone, like you don't have one to compare to the other, you're going to be pretty satisfied with both speakers. If you're comparing them side by side, the iPhone does, I think, tend to be just a little bit louder, and also the midtones and the highs are just maybe a little bit punchier. But besides that, I think both are great for listening to music if you need to, or watching content for sure. And then the OnePlus 11 does have a physical SIM card slot. In fact, it has the option of 2 SIM cards. So if you want to be able to have 2 lines on the same phone, you're able to do so with the OnePlus. And it also has the ability to use an eSIM, but I think you can only do 2 lines at a time. You can't do like 2 physical SIM card slots and then an eSIM. I could be wrong though, haven't tried it, don't plan on trying it, but if you want to potentially try it, you could potentially do that on the OnePlus. Whereas on the iPhone, it only has eSIM here in the US. I think if it's an international model, you will have that physical SIM card slot, but for me, only eSIM. And as far as like network connections and connectivity, for the most part, I've been just fine. I have been only using Wi-Fi for the most part because I work from home, so I don't really have to go out much and rely on my 5G connections, but I do use Mint Mobile, which runs on the T-Mobile network. So from my experience, it's been perfectly fine for phone calls, text messages, and just connections in general. Both of them have the power button and the volume rocker on opposite sides. So with facing the display, the power button's on the right hand side and then the volume rocker is on the left hand side on both of them. The iPhone does have bigger buttons though, and also just maybe a little bit clickier, but I do like the fact that it's a bigger button on the iPhone. On the OnePlus, they're clicky, they're nice, but they're definitely a bit smaller. And then both of them have a mute switcher / alert slider. So I like it better on the OnePlus 11, the alert slider, because you have the option of either setting it to mute, vibrate, or ring. Whereas on the iPhone, it's only able to switch between mute or sound mode. So I do like the ability to mute everything and also turn on vibrations at the same time, versus the iPhone either has to be on mute or essentially vibrate. And then looking at the haptics, I think both of them have decent haptics. On the OnePlus 11, it does feel a bit more denser and more, maybe a bit more tactile, versus on the iPhone, they're just a little bit more subtle for when like you're texting and stuff like that. For calls and stuff like that, it definitely gets plenty strong enough in my opinion. But I do like the way they feel a bit better on the OnePlus 11. They just feel more at you, more intense, but of course you can change the intensity if you want to. Both of them also have an IP rating, but the OnePlus 11 is an IP64 versus IP68 on the iPhone. So that just means that the iPhone can survive submergence in water, I believe fresh water. So if you drop it, say in like the toilet or something like that, you should be just fine. But what matters to me is that they survive splashes, because I'll occasionally use them in the shower. If they get splashed with water, it's all good. As far as the displays, the OnePlus 11 does have a 6.7-inch 1440p LTPO3 AMOLED 120 Hz display with a peak nittage of I think 1300 nits, versus the iPhone 14 Pro Max that has also a 6.7-inch display, just under 1440p quality, Super Retina XDR OLED 120 Hz Pro Motion display with I think a peak nittage of 2000 nits. Either way, basically what that means is that both of these displays are high-end flagship displays, and honestly, both of them are going to perform really well, whether it be just watching long-form content on YouTube or whatever you like to watch your content on, and also short-form content. I think both of them look really good and are going to provide you with a great display. If anything, the OnePlus 11 does look just a little bit more vivid and punchier with the colors, versus the iPhone is a little bit more neutral, more natural looking, not as punchier with the colors. And as far as brightness, even though the iPhone can get higher in its nittage, it only really comes into effect when you're in a bright environment such as outside with lots of sunlight. Naturally, or manually I should say, I think the OnePlus does look a little bit brighter, but then in some videos sometimes the iPhone looks a bit brighter, but honestly both of them get plenty bright enough. And something else to consider besides the quality of the display is going to be the build and design. So the OnePlus 11 does have a slightly less wider display in portrait view compared to the iPhone. Is more of a, or has a wider display, and then the OnePlus 11 also has curved edges, which aren't as curved. You do feel it, which feels pretty nice whenever you're using the back gesture tool or just scrolling around in general. So it does add to that little premium feeling a bit there, unless you absolutely hate it and prefer a flat display, which is nice for screen protectors because you can get a pretty cheap glass one for the iPhone versus on the OnePlus 11. The glass ones I think cost like a little bit more and are probably a bit more challenging to install, so I honestly don't even bother. But actually, you do have a pre-installed screen protector on the OnePlus 11. It is a plastic one, but I left it on just because it protects it from small little scratches and stuff like that. And both of them have rounded corners, which I noticed that in some applications you do get a bit of the content cut off, whether it be a video or whether it be an actual application like a game or something like that may have some menu buttons very close to those edges and corners. And both of them have pretty minimum bezels, but I guess you could argue that the OnePlus 11 does have a slightly thick forehead and chin, but besides that, I think it's pretty minimum. And then the iPhone does have the same size bezel size throughout the whole display. And then those camera cutouts, the iPhone has the pill cutout, which just gets in the way when you're watching content that's on a wider aspect ratio. So it'll just start to poke itself in there. And then once you pinch the zoom, in my opinion, I think it's pretty noticeable. It does have some pretty neat software usage and stuff like that and features with it. But besides that, I think it's more intrusive than the notch was back then. Versus on the OnePlus 11, you do have a singular camera cutout, which is in the top left corner. Only argument you could have is that you could wish that it was in the middle instead of being on the top left. As far as passcodes and biometrics, both of them have the ability to use either a password with characters or a passcode with numbers. And then the OnePlus 11 does allow you to use a pattern as well. For biometrics, both of them have facial recognition, but on the iPhone it does have Face ID, which does use 3D recognition and stuff like that versus a 2D recognition on the OnePlus 11. So it's definitely more secure on the iPhone, and it's also a bit more reliable as well and better at recognizing you in low light situations and weird angles or in further distances. Sometimes the facial recognition of the OnePlus does tend to struggle in those scenarios, but for the most part, I think both of them are pretty snappy and fast. One thing I do like is that on the OnePlus 11, you do have the option to choose whether you want the phone to go right into the home screen once it recognizes your face or stay on the lock screen. And if you stay on the lock screen, both of them have the ability to lock your details of your notifications, so it'll give you a banner of your notifications, but it'll keep it locked with what that notification exactly is until it recognizes your face. And then the bonus of the OnePlus is that it has the ability to use that optical fingerprint sensor. So for me, I think it's pretty fast and reliable most of the time. I like the ability or the fact that I have both options available to me on the OnePlus. Yes, the facial recognition may not be the most secure, and sometimes the fingerprint sensor will fail, but if one of them fails, usually the other one will be just fine to back it up. So I like both options on the OnePlus 11 versus just only having Face ID on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So as far as performance, on the spec sheet on the OnePlus 11, you will get a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with 16 or 8 gigabytes of RAM of LPDDR5X, depending on the model you get. And then you also either get 128 gigabytes of storage, which is UFS 3.1, or 256 gigabytes of storage, which is UFS 4.0. Versus on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, you will get the A16 Bionic chip with 6 gigabytes of RAM, which I'm not sure which kind of RAM it is. I think it's LPDDR5, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. And then you get a base of 128 gigabytes of storage up to a terabyte, which I believe is NVMe. So what does that all mean? Basically, you're going to be getting powerful devices here. So raw performance is fantastic on both of them. Power efficiency is fantastic on both of them. So whatever you do in your day-to-day, whether it be as simple as just texting, calling, scrolling hours of social media, watching a ton of YouTube, scrolling around, whatever you do, you'll be just fine on these devices. And if you want to push them to a little bit more, for me, that just includes maybe using the camera a little bit or playing some games. Both of them have been phenomenal in their performance as well. The only time I ever ran into some kind of hiccup or bug or delay is with the software. Like I said, a bug sometimes may cause some kind of like delay in the animations or stuff like that. But I think both of them are very powerful devices and very good at the efficiency. So the heat management is really good on both of them. I will encounter sometimes both of them will maybe warm up a little bit, but it's not to the point that it's causing the phone to overheat or you can't use your phone anymore because it's too hot or anything like that. No. The performance is good and also efficient. As far as software, it is Oxygen OS with Android 13 versus iOS 16. Overall, both of them provide you with a good amount of software customization and features. And as far as fluidity and freedom of bugs, I would say they're about equal. I would say fluidity is pretty good on both of them. I think maybe I prefer the animations just a little bit more on the iPhone. Sometimes I think the OnePlus or Oxygen OS trying to copy the animations of iOS. I don't know, but I think both of them are pretty fluid overall. And as far as bugs, I haven't encountered too many in my opinion. For me personally, some few things I have encountered is, like I said earlier, sometimes the refresh rate will drop down to 60. Not always. There was like 1 or 2 times it's happened in my whole time using the iPhone. Versus on the OnePlus 11, I did encounter this one bug where the UI element for the work mode, it would tell me that I can't access the app because I'm in a work mode right now, and it just got stuck. So I had to hard reset the device. And sometimes when exiting an app, like a game or something like that, it sometimes got frozen up a little bit as well, so I had to just close the app and restart it. But small things every now and then, but for the most part, I'd say my experience is pretty good overall. But let's go over some of the different sections of the software so you can get an idea of what it's like using each device. So first, with the lock screen, the OnePlus 11 is boring. It's simple. You get your time clock, one single time clock, your notifications, which, by the way, I'm not a huge fan with the way that notifications show up on the OnePlus 11, just because it shows you your most recent ones, or specifically messages if you have any messages, and then it doesn't tell you that there's more notifications unless you swipe down and are able to see the rest and you can scroll through them. If you don't do that, then you won't know that there's more notifications. Sometimes they'll just start arriving and they just get hidden and you won't realize that they're there. Versus on the iPhone, it's kind of a similar story actually, because for one, the notifications touching on that, they'll show up, the most recent ones on your, like just at a glance, you'll unlock your device and there's your most recent notifications. But after some time, after a while, either you look at them or I think after a set amount of time, they'll start to throw themselves into the notification center. And again, you have to remember to swipe up to be able to see the notification center and see your older notifications. But besides that, you do have a lot more customization options on the iPhone. So for one, you can add widgets that you can see at a glance, whether it be something like the weather or your fitness or Snapchat, a quick toggle to get into Snapchat. And you can also change the clock style a little bit, the color, and I think that's pretty much it. But still, you have a good amount of options that you can change there. You can also set a specific mode for each wallpaper. So directly with the wallpaper selection, just select which focus mode you want to set onto it, so that anytime that focus mode is turned on, or anytime you switch to that wallpaper, it toggles a certain focus mode. And with wallpapers, you have the ability to use a depth effect. Now you do have to remove your bottom row of notifications to be able to access this feature, but it's pretty cool. So if you find an image that has like a obvious background and an obvious foreground, then it can cut it up, or not really cut it up. It can do like a little cutout so that your clock gets placed behind the foreground or whatever it is. It's pretty neat if you find a cool wallpaper or if you take a neat photo of someone or something. And then get here into the home screen. This is where iOS is not my favorite when compared to any other Android device. So with iOS, it does restrict you with, for one, you can't change the grid size. You're stuck with a 4:6 grid size. I like having at least 5 on my grid for the row. And also it does force apps and widgets to the top. So as you move things around, I don't like that sometimes apps or widgets get moved around way too quickly and I'm just trying to move one app. It's just a mess. I find it very, very annoying that it likes to force apps and widgets to the top. For one thing, it's not very ergonomic for your hand. It's not nice that if you place one app on a page, you have to reach all the way to the top. It's a pretty big phone. It's hard to reach. Make things lower. I know there's features on both of them that allow you to swipe down or something like that, so you can bring down the whole phone screen. The only thing I do like about the home screen customization is the fact that you can stack widgets, so you can have a couple of different widgets placed in the same section. I like to combine my health, like my sleep and my fitness, and then my calendar and my tasks. So I like that. I appreciate that. Whereas on the OnePlus 11, the best thing obviously is going to be that you can place apps anywhere. You can fully move widgets anywhere. You can also change the grid size, but it doesn't have stackable widgets. I do wish they would add that. Hopefully Android itself adds that availability. I think only One UI has that available currently. But either way, I do like though that you can actually increase the size of the folders. So you can create this folder. Usually it takes up 1 icon spot, but if you increase the size, it takes up I think like 4 icon spots, and you can still access the apps within the folder. So this just means that you can add more apps on your home screen without increasing the grid size to a big grid size and have a bunch of icons. It just looks really clean in my opinion. I love that ability to do that. You can also change the transition when you're switching from page to page on the home screen, and you can also change the icons. Just more specifically, I like the fact that you can take away the label. I like how clean it looks when you only have just the icon sitting there. Yes, sometimes I'm confused when I download a new app and I don't know what the icon looks like and I'm there just scrolling around trying to find that app, but I think it's very neat looking. The aesthetic is my thing. And then you also have Color OS, or not Color OS, Material U, which basically takes the colors of your wallpaper and applies them to the icons and also the whole system in general. Versus on the iPhone, I think you can do something like that if you use, I think, shortcuts and stuff like that. But that's more work. Versus on Oxygen OS, it's just, or Android in general, it's literally built into the system itself, and it's a quick toggle of a switch instead of individual icons, which I think is much cleaner and simpler. As far as the quick settings and notifications, iOS does split them up into two different sections. So you have your control center, and then you have your lock screen, which is where you'll access your notifications. And then on the Oxygen OS, or just Android in general, one swipe down will bring down your notifications, and then a second swipe down will bring down your quick setting toggles. So it really is going to depend on which one you've used before and how long you've been using it before. And you'll definitely get used to it over some time if you make the switch and stuff like that. So for the most part, notifications work pretty generally the same way. So you'll get notifications, and if you get notifications from the same event, so say, I don't know, Instagram stories, a Twitter thread, or a sporting event, they'll all get grouped together into the same group so that you don't have a bunch of notifications from each individual event or something like that. The small thing that is annoying with Oxygen OS though is that when you're swiping going to the left, it brings up a mini menu, and then it has you click either a trash can or swipe again to clear it. If you're swiping to the right, it clears it. I'm used to, on other Android devices, being able to just swipe either way to just clear it. Versus on the iPhone, if you swipe going to the left, it clears it. If you swipe going to the right, it brings over the widget section, which I don't know. It's weird and it's annoying. You'll get used to it again, but it's a small gripe. Now, looking at the control center and quick toggles, my only complaint with both of them is that they don't bring down all the toggles and sliders and stuff like that lower down on the display. You do have the ability to use some kind of like one-handed mode and stuff like that, but if you just make the UI more one-handed friendly and intuitive, I don't have to worry about that one-handed mode. Look at One UI. But either way, they both do the exact same thing. You get your brightness slider, you get a volume slider on the control center of the iOS, and then you get a bunch of toggles and stuff like that, or quick access to certain settings or certain apps on the iPhone. On iOS, it can quick toggle a bunch of different stuff. One thing to mention is that with the control center, some like sliders and some toggles, you have to hold down on them to be able to access other quick toggles, which it can be confusing sometimes, in my opinion, if you don't realize that there's more toggles inside the slider and stuff like that. Versus on the OnePlus or Oxygen OS, my only major complaint is, for one, like I said, it doesn't bring down the stuff lower down. But two, some toggles, when you hold down on them, you would expect it to go into the settings of that specific toggle. So if you hold down on Bluetooth or stuff like that, it should just hop through or toss you right into the Bluetooth section. But no, sometimes it opens up a little mini menu, or sometimes holding down is the same thing as toggling a toggle on and off. It just turns it on and off. So small things like that bother me, but for the most part, like I said, you'll get used to it if you use it over time. And then you have your app drawer and app library. On the iPhone, you can see it organizes it into different folders, and within each category, it's based off, I think, the description or the category that is set on that app by the developer. So if it's a game, it'll get a place of games. If it's productivity, it'll get a place of productivity. My only complaint is that it's sometimes confusing, or sometimes I don't understand why a certain app is considered productivity or considered other. Like, for example, my maps, I would think that's kind of a utility app, but it's placed in the other, and I just get lost sometimes trying to find certain apps, so I end up using the list view or trying to search for it. Versus on the OnePlus 11, it's just an app drawer. It's literally just all your apps there. You may prefer that over the way it's organized on the app library with iOS, but again, it's one thing that you'll get used to. At least you can sort them with most recently used or most recently downloaded on the Oxygen OS, but that's the app drawer and app library for you. And touching on additional features, I'll first start with the ecosystem. So the iPhone wins it by miles. So for one, it actually has a stable and well-built ecosystem, not only in like iOS with like AirDrop, iMessage, FaceTime, Find My, but also with connectivity with other physical products such as your tablets or iPads, AirPods, MacBooks and stuff like that. So the ability to connect with other devices, whether it be your own or someone else's devices, is well built with the iPhone versus on the OnePlus 11. The only ecosystem it really has is just relying on what Android has. So RCS, Google's Find My, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't really have its own OnePlus ecosystem. Not that it really needs to have its own OnePlus ecosystem, because it's fine with the fact that it can connect to Samsung products, it can connect to Google products and stuff like that. So it's kind of a more diverse ecosystem versus a glass wall ecosystem. So if it's more important to you to have a more refined ecosystem, then you're going to want to go with the iPhone with iOS and stuff like that, versus if you want more options or not really want to be tied down to an ecosystem, that's going to be with the OnePlus. And then touching on multitasking, because that's a big thing to me, both of them have the ability to do picture-in-picture. The only complaint I have with iOS is that you can't place the picture-in-picture little window anywhere necessarily, so you can only place it at the top left, top right, or bottom left, bottom right, versus on Android in general, you can either place it on either side on the left or either side on the right, so you can place it in the middle. It's useful when you're trying to read something and it constantly keeps getting in the way, versus on the Oxygen OS, you can just kind of move it a little bit more freely. Both of them have the option to resize it though. But with Oxygen OS, you also have the ability to split the screen. So this really only allows you to do it with apps that the developer has made the app compatible with it, but it's still pretty useful. So I like to use it with like YouTube. I'll split the screen with YouTube and then, I don't know, Reddit or something like that to browse another app. Sometimes it's useful to compare different shopping apps. So if you're doing maybe like, I don't know, Amazon and Best Buy to compare different pricing and stuff like that, that could be pretty useful. And then you can also use windows, so you can drag and drop these little windows like if it were a computer. So the only time I think I'll ever use this, if I ever do, is going to be the calculator. You also have the Smart Edge Bar Oxygen OS, which kind of goes with multitasking a little bit, so it kind of helps you to multitask, but basically allows you to quick access on another group of apps at any point. So if you're in the middle of I don't know, some kind of game or something like that, or in the middle of an app, you can just swipe over and quickly click one of the apps, or go into your app drawer quickly as well to access another app. The only complaint though is that when you click on one of those apps from the Smart Edge Bar, it does open it up in window mode. I kind of wish it would just open it up in full screen. Then you also have the OnePlus Shelf, which basically is the same thing as the widgets section of the iPhone. This, you swipe to the left and then you get your widgets. On Oxygen OS, if you swipe to the left, you get your Google feed, which, by the way, I like that they added the Google search bar up there. But this shelf thing, I used to use it, but now I don't. Only because before you could access it by swiping from the top left corner. Now it's either you turn on the shelf or you turn on the ability to swipe down to access your notifications. If you want to turn on the shelf to get to your notifications, you have to swipe down from the very top of the display. Otherwise, it'll open up the shelf. So because of that, I don't use the shelf anymore. Then other things with Oxygen OS is that you can customize other small things that you probably wouldn't think of. So for one, the animations for the fingerprint sensor, you can change up one of the few animations that they have available. You can also switch up the quick settings, just the shape that they look. And also with the Material You, forgot to mention with it, but you can choose exactly which colors you want to use for your Material You system, which is pretty unique. Then you have a bunch of other display options. So being able to turn on, I think, enhanced imaging, enhanced brightness and HDR and stuff like that. You can also choose an option that auto selects the resolution, so similar to the refresh rate that goes up and down. You can also have it auto select the resolution. Then you have your secure safe, or just safe in general, I think, which basically is like a private folder that allows you to hide some images, some files and stuff like that. So if you got important work information, you can hide it away in that particular safe. And both of them also have an always on display. With iOS, you only have the option of turning on either just your clock and then your notifications and also your wallpapers. You can kind of like toggle off two different options to kind of choose what you want to show with your always on display. With Oxygen OS, you do have a couple of different options with like choosing different widgets and animations that are available for the always on display, but I don't really use always on displays, but they're there if you want to play with them. I guess more customizable on Oxygen OS. And then some other additional features of iOS that are unique. For one, you have the dynamic island. If you're a fan of that, it is kind of cool that they actually utilized the pale cutout for some software features. But basically, you can have the ability to show your timer, music if you're listening to music, your calls when you get a call, the little waveform thingies show, which is pretty cool. Then you can hold down on that little event, I guess, and be able to access some quick settings for it. So like the playback controls can be accessed from there. The timer can be stopped and turned on. You can hang up on someone from there. So it's, I guess, there, but I don't really care for it that much. You can also turn on something called a notification summary, which basically allows you to put in certain apps that you only want them to show within the summary, instead of getting individual notifications anytime some kind of event happens from that app. It'll just show up all together at a certain time that you select. I also like that you can turn on a quick tap and double tap feature on the iPhone, which is accessibility settings. So double tapping for me brings down the control center, and then triple tapping brings down the lock screen for my notifications, because you have to reach the whole way to the top to access those sections. Double tapping the back of my phone is much easier. And as far as software support and software updates, with the OnePlus 11, you are promised 5 years of security updates and then 4 years of major OS updates. So you will be getting up to Android 17 on the OnePlus 11, versus on iOS or on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, you are promised, I think, maybe, I don't think they actually announced how many years they'll support it, but they'll just happen to stop saying that they'll support it. But I think usually they go for about 5 to 6 years. So you have iOS 16 right now, so you'll probably be good till iOS 21 or something like that. So you'll be just fine with the iPhone. So whichever one you pick, you'll get a lot of life out of them. But if you want one that holds the best resale value, you're probably going to go with the iPhone. And the iPhone does seem to be a little bit more consistent with how often it gets the updates. It's at least once a month. Versus on the OnePlus 11, I think it's maybe bi-monthly. So every other month you'll get an update, but it also might depend on your carrier. As far as cameras, I'm not a very camera user in my day-to-day. I really just rely on what the phone has to offer. So I just point and shoot and hope for the best when it comes to the processing. So let's see how they compare. Starting off the front, the OnePlus 11 does have a 16 megapixel front camera versus a 12 megapixel on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. As far as the looks though, the OnePlus does tend to look a little bit warmer, which I kind of prefer only because it makes me look a little bit more tanner. But besides that, I wouldn't say both of them are the most accurate when it comes to the skin color. But both of them also tend to overexpose and blow out some highlights in certain areas. So if like there's a big white bright section behind me, then it does tend to blow it out. In low light situations, the iPhone again does tend to look a bit more detailed. When you take a selfie, both of them have a little fill light that they use, but the OnePlus does have a more constant fill light, so it just turns and brightens up the display, and it's actually able to give you a little bit more light. Versus the iPhone, it just like briefly flashes it, and it's not super bright, so it does tend to look pretty bad when it comes to low light or just pitch black situations. For video on the front, the OnePlus does cap out at 1080p versus 4K on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So the iPhone definitely takes the win here. Not only does it look more detailed because of that 4K quality, it just looks more natural looking because the OnePlus 11 does tend to look a little bit warmer as the photos did. And also it continues to overexpose those whites and highlights and sections and stuff like that. The iPhone also has an autofocus on the front camera, which allows you to focus on something that's in front of your face if you're filming yourself. And then in low light situations, if you have some kind of fill light, even though the OnePlus is 1080p, it kind of looks sort of similar to the 4K of the iPhone. It is a bit grainy, and you do see like a red overlay, but it's kind of comparable, I want to say. But I still think the 4K quality of the iPhone looks a little bit better in low light. And then in pitch black situations, the OnePlus and the iPhone actually both look terrible. I'm not sure why you would film yourself in pitch black situations, but if you did, you can at least see a little bit of movement. As far as the back cameras, the OnePlus 11 does have a 48 megapixel ultra wide versus a 12 megapixel ultra wide on the iPhone. And then the wides, it's a 50 megapixel on the OnePlus versus a 48 megapixel on the iPhone. And then the telephoto, it's a 32 megapixel on the OnePlus and then a 12 megapixel on the iPhone. So as far as the quality though, I noticed that the OnePlus's ultra wide and wides are a bit more vibrant looking compared to the iPhone. Versus the iPhone, the colors don't pop out at you as much. It's more natural looking. I think the OnePlus also has better overall HDR, just because in some areas where the photo is a bit darker, like in the shadows and stuff like that, and also where there's areas where it's bright because it's a white background or a white object or something like that, or the sky itself, it does tend to lose some detail. It's just overblown out and overexposed. Versus the OnePlus 11 is able to get a little bit of detail of stuff around the bright section or just that white section itself. Another thing too is that the OnePlus is not as consistent in its colors when switching from the ultra wide and wide to the telephoto. So the ultra wide and wide are very similar. and then the telephoto just changes a little bit up in the colors. It does look maybe a little bit warmer on the 2x telephoto versus the iPhone. It's very consistent. So from the ultra wide down to the telephoto, it tends to look the same. I don't think I see much of a difference in the color or anything like that. And then when you are zooming in, the 3x optical telephoto versus the 2x optical of the OnePlus 11 is overall pretty good and pretty detailed. But if you're using digital zoom, the iPhone just maybe looks just a bit more detailed. So as you start to zoom in, the iPhone just looks a little bit more detailed. You can see the strands of grass or the strands of a branch or whatever with a bit more detail. It does cap out at 15x on the iPhone and then 20x on the OnePlus 11. I would think that it'd be other way around because the one's at 3x and one's 2x, but I'm not sure how cameras work, so it is what it is. I do wish that the iPhone could zoom in a little bit further. And then the ultra wides also both have autofocus, so both of them allow you to do like a little macro like shot. In low light situations, the OnePlus is not able to bring in too much light, so it's not kind of reversed. So now some shadows in some areas are a little bit darker compared to the iPhone, which does bring in a bit more light, so it does overall look a bit brighter. And then when zooming in, the iPhone has way more detail here. So again, I guess because it's not able to bring in too much light, the OnePlus does tend to struggle. So zooming in low light situations, it's much better on the iPhone. In pitch black situations, while both of them aren't as great, I did notice that indoor, the iPhone again is able to capture a little bit more light and hence a better overall image, although it may not necessarily be usable. And the OnePlus, I noticed that it can bring in a little bit of decent light and get something out of the image, but for some reason on the wide lens, it does tend to add these like reddish dots for some reason. I'm not sure why it's doing that, but it's showing up when I'm using it in pitch black situations that are indoors. In pitch black situations that are outdoors, both of them I think are overall pretty good. Sometimes they'll be able to trade shots back and forth, but for the most part, I think the OnePlus actually does a better job here of bringing in more light somehow. So in like low situations where the sun's just setting down, the iPhone's better, and then the OnePlus struggles a little bit. But then when it's pitch black, the OnePlus is back being better, and the iPhone tends, I wouldn't say struggles, but maybe it doesn't bring in as much light. The only thing I noticed is that the OnePlus is on the cooler side of the color temperature when you're taking photos in pitch black situations. Now, as far as video, the OnePlus 11 can go up to 8K 24, but I only shoot my video in 4K 30. The OnePlus can record 4K on the ultra wide and the wide, but on the telephoto, it can only do 1080p. So when you switch to the telephoto, when you're using 4K or recording 4K, it's not going to actually record in 4K or actually going to record using the telephoto. It's just going to digitally zoom in to 2x with the wide lens. iPhone, on the other hand, can record 4K on all three lenses. So that's good overall. So that means you're getting better quality as you zoom in. So as far as color though, the OnePlus is similar to the photos where it tends to overall look a little bit brighter in the video, and the shadows and the blacks and whatnot tend to be a little bit brighter and show more detail in those areas, versus the iPhone does look just more natural and not as vibrant and punchier in your face. But I would also say the OnePlus in video tends to look a little bit too over sharpened compared to the iPhone. And since you can't shoot 4K on the OnePlus, and like I said, as you start to zoom in, the iPhone just kills it. Just kills the OnePlus, because as soon as you start to get anywhere from 5x and further, the OnePlus 11 just looks really grainy. Even in like well-lit situations in outdoors with the sun out, it just looks rough. And then when you start to remove some light, the OnePlus just struggles even more. It just looks bad. So, but oddly enough, the OnePlus only caps out at 10x, and then the iPhone caps out at 9x, even though it does have that telephoto available. But either way, take that as you will. And once you start to remove the light from the video, again, if you're under a little bit of light with like a street light or something, you'll be fine. You'll be able to capture video. It's not like it's going to go away completely. But once you remove all the light, you'll notice that both of them, they struggle. It's grainy, it's staticky. But on the OnePlus, I did notice that it does again add like a weird red overlay filter over top of the red graininess. It's kind of weird. And then when you're zooming in, both are pretty bad, but again, the iPhone just tends to add a hair more detail, so it looks bad, but not as bad as the OnePlus. Also checked out the stabilization modes on both of them, and the OnePlus does cap it out at 1080p 60, versus the iPhone can go to a 1440p 30. and also 60 as well if you wanted to. But one thing I noticed is that for one, the OnePlus cannot switch between the ultra wide and the wide while you're in the middle of recording. You have to stop the video and then switch the lens if you wanted to do that. Versus the iPhone, it can switch right between the ultra wide and wide while you're recording. And both of them overall do a pretty good job of stabilization. I would say the OnePlus does look a little bit more processed versus the iPhone does look a little bit more natural, like a gimbal. And looking at social media, in my case, Snapchat, on the OnePlus overall in general, it's not going to be the best quality that you can get, especially if you're using the front camera. The front camera is already pretty bad on the OnePlus 11 in my opinion, and then using it on Snapchat, not the greatest. It's going to look grainy in some shots. It's going to look pretty Android-like if you ask me, and video just looks bad as well. It looks worse than 1080p. I'm not sure what kind of quality it's exporting at or compressing it at, but it looks pretty rough. And then if you use the back camera, I would say it's not terrible in my opinion. It actually looks pretty decent compared to what you would expect. It doesn't look very distorted or very grainy or anything like that. It tends to look pretty good with the OnePlus compared to the iPhone. But the one thing is that you can't use the ultra wide, you can't use the telephotos, which you can do on the iPhone. And one thing I still am noticing is that if you're zooming in very far with the iPhone on Snapchat, is that it still tends to shake quite a bit. I'm not sure if that's still an iOS bug or what's going on, but I did notice it. So overall with the cameras, I will say that the iPhone is the clear winner, but I'll still say that if you just care about photos, the back camera of the OnePlus, I think is overall pretty good. Now, if you want better video or if you want better cameras for social media, then I'll obviously say get the iPhone. As far as the battery life, the OnePlus 11 does have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery versus the iPhone 14 Pro Max that has a 4,323 milliamp hour battery. And quite honestly, I think I get very similar battery life. If anything, I think the iPhone edges out a couple extra hours, but I think both of them are very comparable. So whichever one you get, I think you'll be able to get a long-lasting battery life out of both of them. Now, of course, it does depend on your usage, so your mileage may vary here. If you're a heavier user, you may be able to get less than what I'm getting, or if you're a super light user, then you may be able to get a little bit more than what I'm getting. So from my experience on the OnePlus 11, I'll get anywhere from a minimum of 16 hours of total usage to about maybe 30 hours total, so a day and like a couple extra hours into the next day. So I can get a pretty good amount of battery life out of this one with about maybe 4 to 7 hours of screen on time. And then the iPhone 14 Pro Max, I'll get anywhere from a minimum of, again, 16 hours of usage to about, again, similar 30 hours of total use, sometimes 32 or 34. So I can get about a day and a half with this phone, which is ridiculously good. And the fact that I can get over a day on the OnePlus sometimes is also ridiculously good. So whichever one you get, if you unplug in the morning, you definitely won't have to plug into it in the night. Now, again, of course, your mileage may vary here. So maybe some of you will get down to like 1 or 2% or 5% if you're really pushing your devices every day. But for the most people, I think you'll be fine on either of them. And if you do have to plug in, the OnePlus 11 takes the cake here. So it does come with an 80-watt charger in the box. It is USB-A to USB-C, but it is able to charge your device in about under 30 minutes. So that's very good versus the iPhone takes well around an hour and like 30 to 45 minutes, I think. But it is pretty fast when it comes to charging from, I think, 0 to about 50 or 60%. So it takes about a half hour, I think, to get to that point, which is not as good as the OnePlus 11, but still plenty enough to get you through the rest of the day if you have to charge during the day. Both of them, actually no, I almost said both of them have wireless charging, but the iPhone does come with wireless charging, and it does have the ability to use MagSafe and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, which one should you go out and get? The iPhone 14 Pro Max or the OnePlus 11? I'll look at it this way. The iPhone has great hardware, great performance, good software, just because iOS is not my favorite cup of tea. I'd always pick Android over iOS. And it had great display, great cameras, and great battery life. Versus the OnePlus 11 has great hardware, great performance, good software, just because while it is Android, there's some small things that Oxygen OS does that is kind of annoying to me, but it is what it is. A great display, good cameras, just because the video side is a little bit lacking, some of the social media side, and also the front camera side is definitely lacking there. And then great battery life. So definitely personal preference, which one you prefer is up to you. But for me, I'd tell you to go get the OnePlus 11. The pricing is great on this. I think they nailed it perfectly with that pricing. So you're getting the best bang for your buck for the OnePlus 11, in my opinion. So with that being said, that's been it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and peace.